Welcome to Miyconst Hardware. In this video I'm going to tell you about this tiniest power supply from SKYWIND International that I bought on AliExpress. The power supply model name is TF600, but the actual output of the power supply is 550 watts. And for you to understand how tiny this thing is, I have got my standard test power supply, the EVGA750P2, and here you can see the size comparison, how small and how tiny this thing is. The standard ATX power supply is almost as big as this mini ITX chassis that I'm going to use to assemble a mini ITX gaming computer with this TF600 power supply. Here you can see that this ATX power supply is almost as big as this tiny mini ITX sandwich style chassis. Okay, now you understand how tiny this power supply is, so let's talk about the packaging. The power supply comes in such box, and as you can see, the power supply itself has modular design, and it means that we can disconnect all the cables from the power supply, and it is very important, especially for me, when you are assembling the tiniest computers, you can remove all the unnecessary cables. So from the cables, of course, we are getting the 24-pin power connector for the motherboard itself. And then we have the 4+4 power connector for the CPU. Actually, for the power supply, it's only 4 pins, but then here we have 4+4 in a daisy chain configuration. For the graphics cards, we have 8+8 PCI Express power connectors, and then this was a surprise for me because on the AliExpress description page it is specified that there is only one 8-pin power connector, but I have received such cable which has two 8-pin power connectors, also the daisy chain configuration, which might be a plus, might be a minus, depends on what you want. And the last one is for the SSD or HDD drives. We have two Molex connectors and two SATA connectors. In my case, this cable is redundant because I'm going to use an M.2 SSD drive, and that one doesn't need extra power cables or power connectors. Finally, let's talk about the performance of this tiniest TF600 Flex ATX power supply from AliExpress. First of all, I'm not an expert and I'm not even knowledgeable in power supplies. Thus, I'm not going to even attempt to evaluate the internals of the power supply and tell you if they are good or bad. Still, I'm going to show you how the power supply looks inside, and if you understand something in the power supplies, then please welcome to tell me in the comments or in my Discord if this is a good or a bad power supply. What I can say from myself is that internally the power supply looks very similar to such power supplies as Silverstone FX600 and the enhanced ENP-7660B. The power supplies are not identical, but it looks similar. For testing, I have done the following. I have assembled my test bench where I have Xeon E5-2696V3 with the Turbo Boost unlock. I added NVIDIA GTX 980 graphics card and started a stress test. As a baseline, I have done some tests with my EVGA750P2 power supply, which according to the EVGA specification is supposed to have 94% efficiency, and I have got the following results. So starting in the stress test with GPU-Z, where we do the render test, so the CPU is not under load, my system with the 750P2 power supply consumes about 245 watts. If I take the 94% efficiency and calculate how much the system actually consumes, it will be about 230 watts. In the same configuration, under the same stress test, the system with this TF600 power supply consumed about 251 watts, and that results into about 92% efficiency, and I believe it is very good. The next stress test is 8064 without GPU, so I test everything but the GPU does nothing. And in this configuration, my system with the 750P2 power supply consumes about 260 watts, and with this tiniest TF600 power supply, the system consumes about 265 watts, and if we do the math, we get about the same efficiency of 92% for the SKYWIND TF600 power supply. The next test is MSI capacitor, where the graphics card is doing the job and the CPU is idling, and the watt meter with the 750P2 gives me readings of 293 watts. And the same system with the same stress test with the TF600 from SKYWIND consumes 305 watts. The efficiency is staying at somewhere around 90%. The worst result for SkyWind TF600 I have got with the CPU-Z stress test. Here, the system with the 750p2 power supply consumes about 250 watts. To SkyWind TF600, the system consumes up to 265 watts. And that results to about 89% efficiency, still very good, but this was the worst result I've received with this TF600 power supply. I have also tested stress test CPU plus GPU-Z, and the final test, which consumes the most power, is CPU-Z plus MSI combustor. In this configuration, the system with the 750p2 power supply consumes about 440 watts, and swapping the power supply to SkyWind TF600, the system consumes about 455 watts. Again, doing the math, the efficiency goes to about 91%, which is really good. This stress test with about 455 watt power consumption I let running for more than half an hour. The power supply was noisy, and that is kind of expected, because this tiniest fan is supposed to cool down the entire power supply. The power supply heated up. On the surface I have registered up to 52 degrees Celsius, but the power supply heated up rather quickly and then stayed at this temperature 51-52 degrees Celsius during entire stress test. I don't know if the power supply would die if I would keep running the stress test for 2-3 hours, but obviously it's not my goal to kill the power supply. That's why I have tested it for 30 minutes, actually 35 minutes. Power supply didn't die, it didn't overheat. Yes, it was noisy, but it worked just fine and the system was completely stable. So I would say it's a pass. For the conclusion, what can I say about the SkyWind TF600 power supply in Flex ATX form factor from AliExpress? As always, I never recommend to anybody to buy a power supply from AliExpress. If you have a possibility to buy Silverstone FX600 power supply from your local stores or from Amazon or from somewhere else, please go with that power supply. You will get a known brand and the warranty for your power supply. But if you're like me, you're willing to experiment and you are okay to have some risk, then SkyWind TF600 power supply might be an interesting option. Maybe in the future we will get some detailed testing of this power supply from gurus such as Gamers Nexus or Debauer, but for now I have these limited tests and I'm rather happy with this tiny power supply. In my case, I'm going to build that mini ITX system with Core i5-12400F and NVIDIA RTX 3060. As you can guess, the power consumption with this mini ITX system will be significantly smaller compared to my test bench with the Xeon and GTX 980, so I don't think this TF600 power supply will get any troubles powering up my mini ITX gaming rig. Also, I could mention that this fan could be replaced with a silent Noctua fan, but I would not recommend doing that because the Noctua fan has significantly lower maximum rotation speed and under stress test the power supply might overheat. Yes, Noctua fan is significantly quieter, but the safety first, and you need to keep your power supply cool. It's also worth to mention that the power supply is not noisy at all if you do not put significant load on it, so I don't see any reason why would you bother to replace this fan with a Noctua fan and risk overheating and burning down your power supply. With this, I have to say thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope it was interesting and I hope I have helped someone. Bye for now.